Hey, it's Patrick. Today I want to talk about a movie I worked on called Her Minor Thing. And this is an actual DVD that of the actual movie, and it's a romantic comedy that came out in 2005. And it starred Estella Warren, Christian Kane, and Michael Weatherly, among actually a pretty great cast. It was written by Jim and Deborah Myers and was directed by Charles Matthau, who was actually the son of Walter Matthau. I worked on it in 2005, and by that time, the filming had already been finished, and most of the editing was actually done as well. So I was brought on pretty late in the project, but I guess that they had done some test screenings, and there was some confusion with the audience. There was some backstory that kind of needed to be filled in. And so their idea was, since they had already wrapped filming, was they wanted to use some animation in the opening title sequence to try and give a little backstory to the characters, and it would help the audience understand a little bit more when the movie actually starts. And specifically, it would help the audience understand the history of the characters and how they met. If you watch the movie, you'll know what I mean. A producer on the movie actually had known about my work from seeing Traveling Gringos online. And they contacted me to see if this project was something that I would be interested in doing and helping them out with. But the timeline was pretty difficult. They only had about 2 to 3 months from when I would start working on it to when I needed to have my animation finished, so that they could get it into certain film festivals that they were trying to get it into that year. So I actually made the decision to quit my current job at the time to work on this project full time, because I knew the scope of the work and the short timeline was going to be pretty much impossible to do if I had a full-time job. So anyway, it was a hard decision to make, but I quit my job and just started working on this full time for the next 2 to 3 months. And we actually got the project, the animation, done on time. So, and I know that if I didn't quit that job, I never would have gotten it done in time to make the deadlines that they had for their film festival submissions. So when I started working on the project, I was working directly with the writers of the movie, and we would get feedback from the director depending on what work we had done, and would submit, storyboards or animatics or even rough animation and get some feedback and work like that, going back and forth. So again, this was for the opening titles of the film. So, the credits that roll in the beginning, and I would design the titles of that sequence. And I also was interspersing animated characters, fully colored animated characters, in between those titles to build out the full title sequence. I was actually expecting to have to redesign new characters for this project, but luckily they actually wanted to use the Traveling Gringo style for the characters. So I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I could just use that style I'd already developed and just, tweak it for the characters in their movie. So per my contract, I can't show any of the animation online. I can show a couple of stills of the actual animation, so I'll post those in this video. But if you want to watch the animation, you're going to have to go find the video, for rent, or find it online somewhere. I'm going to link to the IMDb page for the movie, and on that page you can actually watch the trailer for the film. So check the description below, and I'll link that up. So I was shown a rough cut of the movie, so I had a pretty good idea of what the movie was about. And I was asked to try and brainstorm some ideas of what kind of animation we could have in these opening sequences. And, we had goals of what we needed to do, but we didn't know exactly what ideas we wanted to use. So one of the ideas that I came up with was that the main character she works at a fire station, and her boyfriend came to the fire station, and I had him climb up the fire pole, and he was holding flowers, and he kind of gave her flowers after he climbed up the fire pole. So that's the sequence of the animation that I did. And it was actually a lot harder to animate the guy climbing up the pole than I had anticipated. And I remember, I'd done about 5 or 6 different tests, rough animation tests, and it just wasn't looking right. Like I couldn't get the arms to work with the legs, and it just didn't look like he was climbing a pole. And so I finally decided to just grab my video camera and go film myself climbing a pole at the local playground and use that as reference to animate that shot. So, I don't use a ton of reference in my animation, but, especially with deadlines and client work, there's definitely times when reference can come in handy. So don't be afraid to use it if you need it. Now, remember, I'm an independent animator, so I did all of the work on this myself for the opening title sequence. But so I had that animation done, but then they also ended up using a couple of still drawings that I did for them to put in the actual movie. So it kind of tied the movie together with the original animation a little bit better. So that was kind of cool. And that was kind of an afterthought that we did after the animation was done. So I drew up a couple of stills that were used in the actual movie. So that was fun. So remember, this was back in 2005, and I was trying to figure out what size I wanted to build the project at in my program, and I don't even remember what program I used to animate this in. I was bouncing back and forth between a few programs at the time, but it would have been a 2D pixel-based animation software. I wasn't using Flash or something like that. I'll see if I can remember what program I used, but my point was I didn't know what size to build the project at. And so I went online and there was no information. And the best I could come up with was we decided 1920 by 1080, which at the time was a pretty large canvas to be working on. I remember 720p, which was 1280 by 720, was considered high definition back then. So by building this at 1920 by 1080, it was like we were kind of trying to do a little overkill, make it as good a quality as we could. And remember, your monitors back then didn't have a ton of pixels either. So you're not really drawing at 100% scale. You're kind of zoomed in when you're drawing. But anyway, so we decided on that resolution. And then I had to talk to the editing department down in Los Angeles to figure out the exact frame rate that they needed. And I think we ended up with 30 frames per second. I'll have to go back and look at the original files. It was either 24 or 30. But it needed to match, what they were editing in. And so that's what, you want to make sure that you figure that out before you start your animation work. And I was a little bit worried about the resolution of that size, but eventually I saw the film played in a movie theater on a big, movie theater screen, and it looked fine. You couldn't tell any pixels, or it looked great actually. So that's good to know in the future. It's not 4K or anything, but 1080p on a projection movie theater doesn't look that bad at all. And for final delivery, I remember that the editors asked me for, I believe it was PNG image sequence. It may have been TIFF, to get the highest resolution. I'll have to look at my files and see what it was. But they wanted an image sequence, and then they wanted to import that into their timeline. So that's what I did, and I remember it was gigabytes worth of footage at the end, or files, and there wasn't, Dropbox or anything online to transfer the files. Maybe I could have done an FTP workaround or whatever, but just the internet speeds were so slow to upload a couple of gigabytes. We ended up it was going to take too long, so we ended up just putting everything on a hard drive, and I mailed it down to Los Angeles to get it there on time. And by the end, we were kind of running up against, the deadline to give my files to them, and they needed a couple of days to wrap up their edit and submit those files to the correct film festivals. So after I finished the project and it was out of my hands, I didn't hear back for a few months until they were playing the film for the first time in public at the Seattle International Film Festival. And so my dad and I actually flew to Seattle for the premiere of it and watched it in a full packed house audience, pretty big sized theater. And that was a really good experience for me. And then after we watched the film in the theater, there was a Q&A session with, I believe it was the director, the writers, some of the producers, and even some of the stars were there. And they were taking questions from the audience. And I remember that someone in the audience had asked specifically about the animation that was used in the film. And the writer, Jim, actually said, oh, you know, there are animators here in the audience, and had me stand up, and everybody kind of gave me a round of applause. And so that was actually a really nice moment in my animation career, was getting noticed by an audience for my animation work. This project was a lot of work, but I'm glad I worked on it, and it was actually a great experience working with the writers and everybody that was involved on my end. You know, everybody was really professional, and I had a really good experience working on it. You know, client work is not always that smooth, and this was one of those projects that was a pleasure for me to work on. And I would actually like to take a moment to publicly thank the people who got me involved. Heather and her husband, Morgan Simpson. They were the ones that had seen Traveling Gringos and knew about my work and recommended me to the writer and director. And also to the writers, Jim and Deborah Myers. They were the ones I was working directly with to produce the animation for the film. And I had a great time and experience working with them as well. So if you have a chance to watch the film, I really think you should, even though it's a little older now. It's still it's a fun romantic comedy to watch, and it's really fun to watch. You know, it's a good date night movie. And if you wait until the end of the movie, you may even see my name in the film credits. If you have a chance to watch the movie, let me know what you thought about the animation in the comments below. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and keep on animating.